The chamber was so vast, the clouds formed near its ceiling. Ambassador Thomas Reed stood on a platform no wider than a dinner table, suspended above an abyss of darkness. Around him, rising in endless tiers that vanished into the mist above, sat the representatives of 8,000 spacefaring civilizations. Some were giants covered in armored scales. Others were clouds of luminescent gas held in magnetic bottles. A few were so alien that his human eyes could not process what they were. He was the first human to stand in the grand assembly of the Galactic Concordat. He was also, by every measure the galaxy used, the weakest creature in the room. The voice that spoke came from everywhere at once. It belonged to Primary Overseer Kethvalen, a being of pure crystallized energy who had governed the Concordat for longer than humanity had possessed language. Species designation: human. Origin world: Earth. Solar. Coordinates logged and verified. The voice carried no emotion. It was simply stating facts. You have requested formal recognition and integration into galactic society. This assembly will now hear your petition. Thomas kept his hands steady at his sides. Behind him, through a viewing portal that showed the stars, Earth was invisible. His entire world was nothing but a pale blue dot lost among billions of others. "Thank you, Primary Overseer," he said. His voice sounded small in the enormous space. "Humanity is honored to stand before this assembly." A sound rippled through the chamber. His translator implant struggled to interpret it, finally settling on something close to laughter. But it was not kind laughter. "Honored," repeated a massive creature in the lower tiers. Ambassador Droth Maven was a Calaxian, a species that resembled a mountain of muscle and bone. "The creature is honored. Tell me, little human, do you understand what you are asking for?" Thomas had been warned about this. Earth's intelligence services had spent 2 years gathering information about galactic politics before this moment. They knew that humanity was seen as a joke. "I believe I do." Ambassador Droth Maven. "Then you understand that integration requires contribution." Droth Maven leaned forward, and even from this distance, Thomas could see teeth the size of his arm. What can humanity possibly contribute to a civilization that spans 1,000,000 worlds? You cannot fight. You cannot build. You cannot even survive outside the narrow conditions of your birth world without extensive mechanical support. More laughter. This time, Thomas recognized contempt in it. Primary Overseer Kethvalen pulsed with cold light. "The assessment is accurate. Humanity has been classified as a Category 9 civilization. Minimal threat. Minimal utility. Standard protocol would place you under the protection of a patron species, who would manage your development for the next several thousand years." Thomas nodded slowly. "We are aware of this standard protocol. Then you accept it?" "No." A single word fell into silence. 8,000 species stopped moving, stopped whispering, stopped everything. They stared at the tiny figure on the platform with something that might have been confusion. "Explain," said Kethvalen. Thomas reached into his coat and produced a small data chip. He held it up so the chamber's sensors could read it. "Before I explain, I would like the assembly to review this document. It is our formal application." The data transferred. Across the chamber, holographic displays flickered to life as representatives examined the contents. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber erupted. Voices crashed against each other in a storm of alien languages. Thomas's translator gave up trying to process individual words and simply fed him emotional context, shock, outrage, disbelief, and underneath it all, something that felt like fear. Droth Maven was on his feet, his massive body trembling. "This is insanity. This is suicide." Kethvalen's light had turned a deep red. "Ambassador Reed, you have submitted applications for all 147 unlivable designations. Every single one Yes. These positions have a mortality rate exceeding 90%. Many exceed 99%. Some have killed every worker assigned to them for the past 3 centuries. The primary overseer's voice crackled with something that might have been emotion. No species applies for unlivable designations. They are punishments. They are death sentences. Thomas smiled. It was not a large smile, but in that moment, every eye in the chamber was fixed on it. We read the job descriptions very carefully, he said. Deep core extraction in gas giants. Maintenance of radiation-saturated facilities. First contact with hostile species. Exploration of dimensional anomalies. He paused. We found them interesting. Interesting? A new voice joined the conversation. Counselor Yemeth was a Sylvan, a serpentine being with scales that shifted through every color of the spectrum. She served on the Labor Allocation Committee. Ambassador Reed, I do not think you understand. These positions are not opportunities. They are the jobs that must be done, but cannot be done. We list them as unlivable because filling them is impossible. With respect, Counselor, nothing is impossible. Some things are just difficult. Thomas turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. Humanity has spent its entire existence doing difficult things. We evolved on a world where the climate tried to freeze us, the predators tried to eat us, and the diseases tried to kill us. We survived anyway. We built civilizations in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. We split the atom and walked on our moon and sent machines to the edges of our solar system. He pointed upward, toward the distant ceiling hidden in clouds. You have been traveling between stars for millions of years. We have been doing it for less than a century. And in that century, we have colonized worlds that your species abandoned because they were too dangerous. The silence returned. But it was a different silence now. There was no more laughter. You call us weak, Thomas continued. And by your standards, perhaps we are. Our bodies are fragile. Our lifespans are short. We have no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no biological advantages. He spread his hands. But we have something else. We have stubbornness. We have the absolute refusal to accept that something cannot be done simply because it is dangerous. Keth Valen's form flickered. You would send your people to die. I would send my people to work. What happens after that is up to them. Thomas met the primary overseer's gaze without flinching. Every human who volunteers for these positions knows the risks. They accept them. Because on Earth, we have learned that the greatest opportunities come with the greatest dangers. Counselor Yemeth slithered closer to her viewing screen, studying Thomas with ancient eyes. And if we refuse your application, then you continue to have 147 critical positions that no one will fill. Your infrastructure continues to decay. Your frontier systems continue to collapse. And the problems you have been ignoring for centuries continue to grow. Thomas shrugged. Or you can let us help. The assembly descended into chaos once more. Representatives argued, debated, and shouted at each other in languages that had been old when Earth was young. Thomas stood quietly in the center of it all, waiting. He knew the accept. They had no choice. The galaxy had jobs that needed doing. And humanity had arrived with a simple message. There was no such thing as unlivable. Only underpaid. The storm outside could crush starships into balls of scrap metal. Maria Santos barely noticed it anymore. 300 kilometers below the cloud tops of the gas giant Velthos Prime, she checked the pressure seals on her extraction suit and prepared for another shift. The facility groaned around her, metal screaming as atmospheric pressure tried to fold it like paper. Somewhere in the distance, lightning struck with enough force to power a small city. Santos, you ready? The voice belonged to Foreman Jack Holloway, a man who had been working extreme environments since before first contact. His face was weathered, His hands were scarred, and his eyes held the calm focus of someone who had made peace with death long ago. "Ready as I'll ever be," Maria replied. She had been on Velthos Prime for 8 months. In that time, she had watched the facility lose 2 workers to equipment failure and 3 more to pressure accidents. The Galactic Safety Commission had officially condemned the operation twice. Both times, the human crew had simply continued working. The pay was extraordinary. The danger was constant. And something about that combination attracted humans like moths to flame. Maria stepped into the extraction chamber, where massive mechanical arms reached down into the crushing depths below. Her job was to monitor the systems, make repairs when needed, and try not to die. The previous species that had attempted this work, the Volani, had abandoned the facility after losing 80% of their workforce in a single year. Humans had been here for 2 years. They had lost 12 workers. They considered this acceptable dot far across the galaxy. Commander Victor Okonkwo was preparing for a very different kind of danger. His ship, the U-East Pathfinder, drifted at the edge of the SH. Round Expanse, a region of space that had earned its name by killing everything that entered it. 17 diplomatic missions had attempted to make contact with the species that lived within. 17 missions had resulted in complete crew death, usually within hours of crossing the boundary. The beings inside were called the Morphine. They communicated through a form of psychic projection so aggressive that it caused brain hemorrhages in most galactic species. The Concordat had classified them as permanently hostile and sealed the entire region. Victor had volunteered to try again. "Commander, we're receiving the signal," said Lieutenant Amara Diallo, her fingers dancing across the navigation console. "Same as the others. It feels like pressure inside my skull." Victor nodded. He could feel it too, a sensation like fingers pressing against the inside of his brain. But where other species experienced agony, humans felt only discomfort. Their neural architecture was different, quieter, less susceptible to psychic intrusion. The Concordat scientists had not understood why. They had simply noted it as another human anomaly and moved on. Victor intended to use it. "Take us in," he ordered. The Pathfinder crossed the boundary into the Shroud Expanse. Immediately, the pressure intensified. Victor gripped his armrest as the sensation pushed against his consciousness, probing, testing, seeking Dot, and then suddenly it stopped. A voice spoke directly into his mind. It was not words exactly, but concepts, images, emotions compressed into pure meaning. What Victor understood was simple. "Who are you? Why do you not scream?" He closed his eyes and focused on projecting his response. He thought about Earth, about humanity, about the long journey that had brought them to the stars. He thought about the simple desire to communicate, to understand, to make peace. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then the Morphine responded. For the first time in 300 years, they responded with something other than violence. "You are quiet," the voice said. "We have never encountered quiet before. We will listen." Back on the Concordat station designated Relay 7, engineer Pavel Novak was elbow-deep in a power conduit that was actively trying to kill him. The station was ancient, built by a civilization that had vanished before most current species had evolved intelligence. Its power systems ran on principles that modern science barely understood, and they leaked radiation that would be fatal to most organic life. Within hours of exposure. Pavel had been working on the station for 3 months. He rotated out every 2 weeks to prevent accumulated damage, underwent intensive medical treatment, and then returned to continue his work. The Concordat had offered to provide robotic alternatives. Pavel had politely declined. Machines could not adapt. Machines could not improvise. And the station systems were so old, so strange, that only organic intuition could navigate their mysteries. "Novak, "Your exposure is approaching limits," said the station AI, its voice echoing through the empty corridors. "I know." Pavel did not stop working. His fingers traced the alien circuitry, feeling for the fault that had been causing power fluctuations throughout the sector. "Just a few more minutes." "That is what you said 30 minutes ago." Pavel smiled grimly. The fault was close. He could feel it, a wrongness in the flow of energy that his training had taught him to sense. Just a little deeper, a little further, and he would find it. His radiation badge turned from yellow to red. Got it. His hand closed around a junction box that had been improperly sealed, probably centuries ago. He made the repair with quick, practiced movements, ignoring the warning alarms that filled the corridor. The power fluctuations stopped. Pavel withdrew from the conduit and checked his badge. He was over his limit. He would need an extra week of treatment this time. The medical staff would yell at him again, not worth it. These 3 humans, separated by thousands of light years, were part of a quiet revolution that the Concordat had not anticipated. When humanity had applied for the Unlivable designations, the galactic powers had expected failure. They had expected humans to die in the same numbers as every other species that had attempted these jobs. They had approved the applications because they had nothing to lose. Instead, something strange was happening. Human workers were not dying at the expected rates. They were adapting, innovating, solving problems that had plagued galactic infrastructure for centuries. The gas giant extraction facilities were producing more helium-3 than ever before. The ancient stations were being brought back to full functionality, and diplomatic channels were opening with species that had been considered permanently hostile. Concordat Labor Commission held an emergency session to discuss the implications. Counselor Yemeth reviewed the reports with growing unease. "Human mortality rates are currently at 14%, she said to the assembled delegates, compared to the historical average of 93% across all species. Ambassador Drothmaven leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "How is this possible?" "We do not know." Yemeth's scales rippled with colors that indicated confusion. "Their biology is unremarkable. Their technology is primitive by our standards. There is no logical explanation for their success." But there was an explanation. It simply was not one the Concordat was prepared to accept. Humans did not work despite the danger. They worked because of it. Every generation of humanity had been shaped by catastrophe, by struggle, by the constant need to adapt or die. They had evolved not to avoid risk, but to calculate it, to accept it, to push through it in pursuit of something greater. The galaxy had spent millions of years building systems designed to minimize danger. Humanity had spent its entire existence learning to survive it. And now, for the first time, the Concordat was beginning to wonder, what happened when a species that thrived in death started asking for more than dangerous jobs? On Velthos Prime, Maria Santos finished her shift and looked out at the endless storms. On the Pathfinder, Victor Okonkwo began the slow process of building trust with beings that had never known anything but violence. On Relay 7, Pavel Novak started planning his next repair mission. They did not know it yet, but they were changing the galaxy, one unlivable job at a time. The file was 900 years old, buried under encryption that should have been unbreakable. Ambassador Thomas Reed read it in the silence of his quarters on Station Meridian, and felt the floor drop away beneath his feet. The document was titled Labor Population Control Protocols, Long-Term Species Management. It had been authored by a committee of the Concordat's founding species, the same beings who now sat in judgment over humanity. And it described, in cold and clinical language, exactly how the Unlivable designations had been created. They were not accidents of nature. They were not jobs that were inherently too dangerous to perform. They were manufactured death traps, deliberately designed to kill workers at specific rates. Thomas scrolled through the evidence with growing horror. Safety regulations that ensured equipment failure. Radiation limits set just below immediately lethal, guaranteeing slow death over years. Facility designs that maximize danger while appearing to minimize it. Everything calculated, everything intentional. And the reason was worse than the method. 800 years ago, a species called the Threll had filled most of the dangerous positions in the galaxy. They had been hardy, adaptable, willing to work in conditions that other species avoided. They had become wealthy. They had become powerful. They had begun demanding representation in the Concordat's highest councils. So the Concordat had changed the rules. The documents showed it all. New safety standards that made Threll work methods illegal. Equipment requirements that bankrupted Threll companies. And through it all, the steady drumbeat of workplace deaths, increasing year by year as the regulations tightened. The Threll had not been conquered. They had been exterminated through labor policy. And now, Thomas realized with cold certainty, the same thing was happening to humanity. He opened a secure channel to Earth. His hands were steady, but only through conscious effort. Priority transmission. Authorization read Alpha 7. Get me the Secretary General. 12 hours later, the leaders of humanity's scattered workforce gathered in a virtual meeting space, their images projected across the stars. Maria Santos was there, her face tired from another shift in the gas giant storms. Victor Okonkwo attended from the edge of Morthene space, where his diplomatic mission was making progress that the Concordat had deemed impossible. Pavel Novak joined from a medical facility, recovering from his latest radiation exposure. Thomas shared the documents. He watched their faces as they read. Maria was the first to speak. They've been killing us on purpose. Not on purpose, Thomas corrected. On schedule? The regulations are designed to maintain a specific mortality rate, high enough to prevent us from accumulating wealth or influence, low enough to keep us working. He pulled up another file. Look at this. They've already started adjusting the safety requirements at your facility, Maria. Minor changes. Barely noticeable. But if you run the numbers, your expected death rate will increase by 20% over the next 3 years. Victor's expression was unreadable. The Morthene told me something strange during our last session. They said that other species had tried to communicate with them before, centuries ago. Species that no longer exist. He paused. They said the quiet ones always disappear. Pavel nodded slowly. I found records on Relay 7. The original builders of that station, they were like us. Willing to work in dangerous conditions. Willing to sacrifice for progress. His voice was heavy. The Concordat classified them as extinct 400 years ago. Natural decline, according to the official records. It wasn't natural, Thomas said. None of it was natural. The Concordat has been doing this for thousands of years, calling any species that becomes too useful, too successful, too threatening. He looked at each of them in turn. And now it's our turn. The silence stretched across light years. Finally, Maria spoke again. So what do we do? Thomas had been thinking about that question since he first read the documents. The obvious answer was to withdraw, to pull all human workers out of the Unlivable designations and expose the Concordat's crimes to the galaxy. But that approach had problems. If we withdraw, we lose our leverage, he said. Right now, we're essential to galactic infrastructure. 60% of the critical systems in the core worlds are being maintained by human crews. If we walk away, we're just another failed species with grievances. And if we stay, we die slowly, Pavel replied. Maybe. Thomas leaned forward. Or maybe we change the game. He pulled up a new display, showing a map of human positions across the galaxy. There were thousands of them now, scattered through every sector, embedded in every critical system. We've spent 2 years proving we can survive where no one else can, Thomas said. We've built relationships with species the Concordat considers hostile. We've learned how their systems work, inside and out. We've made ourselves indispensable. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The Concordat created the Unlivable designations to control dangerous species. They never considered what would happen if a dangerous species used those positions to control them. Victor understood first. You want to leverage our positions. I want to make it impossible for them to remove us. Every human worker in the galaxy needs to understand what's at stake. We stay at our posts. We keep the systems running. But we also start talking to each other, coordinating, building networks that the Concordat can't see. Thomas's voice hardened. They think they can kill us slowly, generation by generation, like they did the Thrall. They're wrong. We're not going to wait for them to finish the job. Maria nodded, her exhaustion replaced by something fiercer. The crews on Velthos Prime are already tight. We talk, we share information, we watch each other's backs. It wouldn't be hard to expand that. The Morthene might help, Victor added. They hate the Concordat more than anyone. They've been sealed in their space for centuries, watching species get destroyed one by one. They'd love a chance to push back. Pavel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The stations I work on, the ancient ones, they have records. Histories of species that came before. If I can find more evidence, proof that the Concordat has been doing this systematically, it might convince others to join us. Thomas felt something shift in the room. These were not frightened workers looking for escape. These were people preparing for war. We have to be careful, he warned. If the Concordat realizes what we're planning, they'll move against us immediately. They have fleets, resources, thousands of years of experience at this. We need time to build our position. How much time? Maria asked. Thomas considered. A year, maybe 2. Long enough to establish networks, gather allies, position ourselves in systems that can't function without us. He met her eyes. Long enough to make them afraid to move? The meeting ended with plans, assignments, and encrypted communication protocols. Across the galaxy, humans who had been working simply to survive began working towards something larger. The Concordat had expected them to die quietly, like all the others before them. They had underestimated what humanity was capable of when it had something to fight for. In his quarters, Thomas Reed deleted all evidence of the meeting from his systems. Outside his window, the lights of Station Meridian glittered against the void. The galaxy had listed 147 jobs as unlivable. Humanity had applied in droves, not knowing they were walking into a trap. Now they knew. And they were not going to walk out again until they had changed everything. The quiet revolution had begun. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had never wanted to command a fleet. She had been an engineer once, one of the first humans to work the radiation-soaked corridors of the ancient stations. Her lungs still carried the scars. Now she stood on the bridge of the USS Defiant, watching 600 Concordat warships drop out of hyperspace. They filled her view screen like a wall of metal and fire, each vessel capable of destroying a planet. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Concordat flagship. Tanaka nodded. Put it through. The holographic image of Primary Overseer Keth Valen materialized before her. The crystalline being's light had turned a deep, angry red. Admiral Tanaka, the Concordat has classified humanity as a rogue species. Your workers have been ordered to surrender their positions. Your ships have been ordered to return to Earth and submit to quarantine. Keth Valen's voice crackled with barely contained fury. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Tanaka clasped her hands behind her back. It was a gesture that had become tradition among human representatives. ever since Ambassador Reed had first stood before the Grand Assembly. Primary Overseer, I'm afraid we must decline. This is not a negotiation. Your species has violated the fundamental principles of galactic order. You have conspired against the Concordat, corrupted diplomatic channels, and spread seditious information throughout the labor networks. Keth Valen's form pulsed with dangerous energy. You will comply, or you will be destroyed. Tanaka smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. You're right that this isn't a negotiation, she said. It's a demonstration. She nodded to her communications officer. Across the Concordat fleet, lights began to flicker. Keth Valen's image wavered. What is this? For 2 years, humans have been maintaining your critical infrastructure. We've been inside your power systems, your communication networks, your environmental controls. Tanaka's voice was calm, almost gentle. Your fleet runs on technology that we've been servicing since you approved our labor applications. Do you know how many modifications we've made? The Concordat ships began to drift, their formation breaking apart as systems failed one by one. Your weapons are still functional, Tanaka continued. We're not monsters. But your navigation, your shields, your long-range communications, those depend on components that human engineers have been maintaining for months. Components that we've just remotely disabled. Keth Valen's light flickered between red and something that might have been fear. You would not dare. We already have. Tanaka stepped closer to the holographic image. Primary Overseer, you invited us here to die slowly, generation by generation, like the thrall before us. We found your records. We know exactly what you planned. Her voice hardened. We declined. Behind her, the view screen showed the Concordat fleet in disarray. Ships tumbled without navigation. Communication arrays went dark. The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been reduced to a collection of drifting hulks by workers they had treated as disposable. But Tanaka knew this was only the beginning. The situation is more complicated than you realize, she said. This isn't just about human workers anymore. On cue, new ships began appearing at the edges of the system. They were not human designs. They were strange, organic-looking vessels that seemed to pulse with inner light. Ships from the Shroud Expanse. The Morthene had arrived. Their psychic voice resonated through every mind in the fleet, Concordat and human alike. We have been silent for 300 years. We have watched you destroy the quiet ones, species after species. We will be silent no longer. More ships emerged from hyperspace. Vessels belonging to species that the Concordat had marginalized, exploited, or simply ignored for millennia. The Calaxian mining guilds, tired of being used as manual labor. The Sylvan traders, who had lost their homeworld to Concordat economic policies. Dozens of others, drawn by human outreach, united by shared grievance. Keth Valen's form dimmed. This is rebellion. This is correction, Tanaka replied. You built a system designed to extract value from the vulnerable while disposing of them when they became inconvenient. We're showing you what happens when the vulnerable compare notes. Ambassador Thomas Reed appeared on the bridge, having traveled from Station Meridian for this moment. He looked older than he had 2 years ago, worn down by the weight of what he had learned and what he had planned. But his eyes were clear. Primary Overseer, he said, we have a proposal. Keth Valen's light flickered. You are in no position to make proposals. Actually, we're in the perfect position. Thomas gestured at the paralyzed Concordat fleet, at the Allied ships surrounding it. Right now, 62% of the galaxy's critical infrastructure is being operated by humans or our allies. If we walk away, your core worlds lose power within a week. Your communication networks collapse within a month. Your economy enters a death spiral that you won't recover from for centuries. He let that sink in. Or, he continued, we can talk. The negotiations that followed would be recorded as the most contentious in galactic history. Concordat hardliners demanded immediate military action, only to be informed that their military was currently incapable of action. Moderate factions argued for compromise, afraid of what would happen if they pushed humanity too far. And through it all, Thomas Reed sat at the table with the patience of someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the other side to realize it. The final agreement, signed 3 weeks later, was called the Reed Accords. It dissolved the Unlivable designation system entirely. It established new labor standards with genuine safety requirements and fair compensation. It created an independent oversight body staffed by representatives of formerly exploited species to ensure the Concordat could never again use work as a weapon, and it granted humanity a permanent seat on the High Council. You understand that this changes nothing, Kef Valen said privately to Thomas after the signing. The Concordat has endured for 10,000 years. It will adapt. It will survive. And eventually, it will find a way to restore order. Thomas nodded. Maybe, but right now, order looks different than it used to. Right now, the species that were supposed to die quietly are sitting at your table, making decisions about the future. He smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. That's not nothing. He walked out of the chamber and found Admiral Tanaka waiting for him. She looked as tired as he felt. It's done? She asked. The first part. Thomas looked out at the stars, at the ship still holding position around Station Meridian. The hard work starts now. Building something better is always harder than tearing something down. Tanaka nodded. The workers are asking what comes next. They followed us into this because they believed we could change things. Now they want to see it happen. Then we'd better not disappoint them. Across the galaxy, humans were receiving word of the Accords. On Velthos Prime, Maria Santos read the news and allowed herself a moment of hope. In the Shroud Expanse, Victor Okonkwo shared the development with his Morthine contacts, who responded with something that felt like satisfaction. On the ancient stations, Pavel Novak began planning a future where his work would no longer slowly kill him. They had applied for jobs that were supposed to destroy them. Instead, they had destroyed the system that created those jobs. But Thomas knew that endings were also beginnings. The Concordat had been wounded, not defeated. And somewhere in the galaxy, beings were already planning how to restore what had been lost. The war was over. The real battle was just beginning. 5 years after the Reed Accords, the galaxy looked different. Thomas Reed stood in the Grand Assembly chamber once more. But now, instead of standing alone on a tiny platform, he sat in a council seat that bore the emblem of Earth. Around him, the chamber had been restructured. New seats added for species that had never before had representation. The architecture itself seemed lighter, more open, as if the building had finally learned to breathe. The motion before us, announced Councillor Victor Okonkwo, now serving as humanity's liaison to the coalition of formerly isolated species, is the final decommissioning of the Unlivable designation system. All 147 categories will be permanently removed from the Concordat registry. The vote was unanimous. Thomas watched the proceedings with a sense of surreal displacement. He remembered standing in this same chamber as a curiosity, a representative of a species the galaxy considered barely worth noticing. Now human voices helped shape the future of interstellar civilization. It had not been easy. The 5 years since the confrontation had been filled with setbacks, compromises, and moments when the fragile coalition seemed ready to collapse. Concordat hardliners had tested every boundary, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Economic pressures had strained relationships between species that had nothing in common except shared grievance. And the practical work of building new systems to replace the old had proven more difficult than anyone had anticipated. But somehow they had held together. Maria Santos, now director of the Galactic Infrastructure Authority, had led the effort to transform the dangerous jobs into safe ones. It turned out that most of the lethality had indeed been manufactured. Once the artificial restrictions were removed, once proper safety equipment was permitted, the mortality rates plummeted. The gas giant extraction facilities still required brave workers willing to face extreme conditions. But now they faced those conditions with technology that actually protected them. "We lost 2 workers last year," Maria told Thomas during a private meeting. 2 out of 12,000. The old system would have killed hundreds. Her eyes were still tired, still marked by years of dangerous labor. But there was something new in them now. Hope. The Morphine had emerged from their isolation to become unexpected partners in galactic diplomacy. Their psychic abilities, so deadly to most species, proved invaluable for communication with beings too alien for conventional language. Victor Okonkwo served as their primary liaison, a role that had transformed him from a military commander into something closer to an ambassador for understanding itself. "They're not what I expected," Victor admitted. "When I first made contact, I thought they were just angry, just violent. But it wasn't anger. It was pain. 300 years of being treated as monsters, cut off from everyone, watching the galaxy ignore them." He paused. They just wanted someone to listen. Pavel Novak had returned to the ancient stations, but not as a radiation-scarred maintenance worker slowly dying for a paycheck. He led an archaeological team now, piecing together the history of the civilizations that had built those impossible structures. The radiation had been contained using technology that the Concordat had possessed for centuries, but had never bothered to deploy. The builders of these stations were remarkable. Pavel said in a lecture that was broadcast across the galaxy. They created wonders that we still don't fully understand. And they were destroyed by the same system that nearly destroyed us. He paused, letting his words sink in. We owe it to them and to ourselves to do better. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had overseen the transformation of the galactic defense structure. The old peacekeeping fleet, designed to enforce Concordat dominance, had been reorganized into something more equitable. It was smaller now, less threatening, focused on genuine protection rather than intimidation. "We could have become what they were," Tanaka said privately to Thomas. "We had the leverage. We had the opportunity. We could have simply replaced one dominance with another." She shook her head. "I'm glad we didn't." Thomas understood what she meant. The temptation had been real. In those first months after the confrontation, when humanity held the galaxy's infrastructure hostage, there had been voices arguing for more aggressive action. Why settle for equality when they could have supremacy? Why share power when they could take it? But Thomas had seen what that kind of thinking led to. He had read the records of the Threll, of the station builders, of all the species that had been quietly erased from history. He had no intention of becoming the next entry in that catalog. "We came here to survive," he told the council during one particularly heated debate. "Not to conquer. If we become what we fought against, then we've already lost." The words had carried weight. Enough weight to shift the conversation, to build consensus around a different kind of future. Now, standing in the transformed chamber, Thomas allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had done something that most of the galaxy had believed impossible. They had changed a system that had endured for 10,000 years. Not through superior force, but through stubborn refusal to accept that the way things were was the way things had to be. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "You look pensive." Thomas turned to find Counselor Yemeth approaching. The Sylvan diplomat had been on. Of the first alien officials to support the human cause. recognizing in their struggle echoes of her own species' history. Now she served as liaison between the old guard and the new order. "Just thinking about how we got here," Thomas said. Yemith's scales shimmered with colors that his translator interpreted as amusement. "You arrived with nothing but a list of dangerous jobs and a willingness to die for them. You leave with a seat at the highest table in the galaxy." She tilted her head. "Not bad for a Category 9 civilization." Thomas smiled. "We're stubborn. You are more than that." Yemith's expression became serious. "You are what happens when a species refuses to accept its assigned place in the order of things." The Concordat built its power on the assumption that some species would always be servants and others would always be masters. You proved that assumption wrong. We had help. You inspired help. There is a difference. Yemith gestured at the chamber around them, at the diverse collection of beings that now shared power in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Every species in this coalition joined because they saw what you accomplished. They believed change was possible because you made it possible. Thomas accepted the compliment with a nod, but his mind was already moving forward. The work was not finished. It would never truly be finished. There would always be those who sought to exploit, to dominate, to return to the old ways. The price of the future they had built was eternal vigilance, but that was all right. Vigilance was something humans understood. He walked to the great windows of the chamber and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human workers were still laboring in extreme environments, still facing dangers that most species avoided. But now they did so by choice, with fair compensation, with genuine protection. The jobs that had been designed to kill them had become opportunities for achievement. The galaxy had listed 147 occupations as unlivable. Humanity had applied for all of them, not understanding that they were walking into a trap. But they had survived the trap. They had exposed it. And they had dismantled it so that no other species would ever face the same fate. That was the human way. Not to avoid danger, but to face it. Not to accept the limits others imposed, but to push past them. Not to die quietly when the system demanded it, but to change the system itself. Thomas thought about all the workers who had given their lives in those dangerous positions. Before the truth was known, before things changed, they deserved to be remembered. They deserved to know that their sacrifice had meant something. He made a mental note to propose a memorial. Something permanent, something visible, to honor those who had died so that others might live. Behind him, the council continued its work. Motions were proposed, debated, voted upon. The machinery of galactic governance ground forward, but now it ground in a different direction. Toward equity, toward justice, toward a future where survival was not something you had to fight for, but something every species was entitled to. The session concluded with a final address from Thomas. Reed. He stood before the assembly one last time, looking out at the faces of beings from 1,000 different worlds. "When we first came here," he said, "you called us Deathworlders. You meant it as an insult, as a warning." He paused, letting his words settle into the silence. "You were right. We come from a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. We evolved by refusing to die." He looked around the chamber, at all eyes won through sacrifice, at former enemies learning to see humans as partners rather than tools. The galaxy listed 147 jobs as unlivable. We applied in droves, not because we wanted to die, because we knew that survival is not something you are given. It is something you earn, every single day. He stepped down from the platform as the chamber responded with acknowledgement in 100 different forms. Clicking, humming, flashing lights, psychic resonance. All of it translated to the same meaning. Respect outside the great windows. Human ships moved through space alongside vessels from worlds that had never before known cooperation. The work was not over. It would never be over. But for the first time in galactic history, everyone was working together. The Deathworlders had done what they always did. They had survived, and they had made room for others to survive alongside them. That was their gift to the galaxy. That was their legacy, Dot, and it was only the beginning.